As a member of the royal family, you're used to luxury. That silver spoon you were born with is pretty good. Your life is private jets, designer suits, and waving at crowds who still think monarchy matters. The only real job: don't embarrass the queen. So obviously the best move is jet through dangerous terrain in a stunt plane like it's Top Gun. What could go wrong? Well, it turns out a lot. Find out how one high-flying prince took a nosedive into an early grave and how other royals met a less than majestic end on this episode of the Infographics Show, the most embarrassing royal deaths in the history of mankind. Number 17. Prince William of Gloucester. Prince William of Gloucester was born in 1941 and first cousin to Queen Elizabeth II. He was once fourth in line to the throne, but with every new royal baby, he slipped further down the ladder. He didn't grow up with the pressure of one day becoming king, which meant fewer expectations. When William was born, his father, a younger brother to two kings, was in the military during World War II, and that life of danger set the tone for the young Prince William. Prince William's early life checked all the royal boxes: prep school, Eton, and a stint at a merchant bank. But when his father fell ill, William stepped into his diplomatic shoes and something clicked. He got a taste for travel and then adventure. He would soon go on long treks in the Sahara. But his first love was aviation, taking hot air balloon rides and developing a skill as a pilot. He would become an expert in flying Piper aircraft, treating these small planes as his personal playground. And that would spell his undoing. By 1972, he was a licensed pilot and the president of the British Light Aviation Centre. He competed in air shows and was known as an expert pilot. On August 28th, he and his passenger were competing for the Goodyear International Air Trophy when his Piper Cherokee banked abruptly after takeoff. The plane couldn't make the turn, dipped and spun out of control before crashing into the earth. And so Prince William of Gloucester became one of the only modern royals to die from doing too many things for themselves. Now let's turn the clock way back for a Chinese ruler who discovered that when you've gotta go, you've gotta go. Number 16. Duke Jing of Jin. In 599 BCE, Duke Jing rose to power in the Jin state in ancient China, at a time when tribal skirmishes and shifting alliances were the norm. Known for his bold and often reckless statecraft, Jing didn't hesitate to deploy his military in support of his regional allies. But that aggression came at a cost. Just 2 years into his rule in 597 BCE, he ordered a war against a far stronger rival and suffered a brutal defeat. That kind of impulsiveness would define his 18-year reign. Over his tenure, Duke Jing would be a feared leader who was responsible for conquering a tribe named the Red Din for collaborating with his enemies. He would regain much of his prestige in the Battle of An, which saw him annex much of the state of Qi. But there were many things he couldn't plan for, including mortality itself. In the summer of 581 BCE, he took ill, and a shaman told them that he wouldn't live to eat the wheat of the next harvest. He was haunted by dreams of terrible spirits stalking him, and his pettiness would continue to the very end and lead to an ironic fate. By the time the new harvest rolled around, Jing was still alive, so he had farmers collect it for eating, and then he promptly killed that shaman for making a wrong prediction. But before he returned to the dinner table to enjoy his meal, he felt ill and he retreated to the toilet. After being gone for a while, his attending slaves went to check on him and found that the Duke was upside down in the toilet. He had fallen in and suffered fatal injuries. While historical records from this period are spotty, this tale of pride going before a literal fall was immortalized in the Chinese text Zhuozhuan, which Chinese school children have no doubt snickered at ever since. For this next king, his name might have been Destiny. Number 15. Pyrrhus of Epirus. It's never a good sign when your name becomes a synonym for something bad. But that didn't stop King Pyrrhus, the king of the Molossians. He was a powerful general and one of the top Greek opponents of early Rome. His military was efficient and ruthless, but it relied heavily on manpower, or what we would call cannon fodder. He would win battles, but at the cost of a mass number of soldiers, leading people to ask, did we really win the battle or did we just give the king a PR victory? But it wouldn't stop him from gaining quite the reputation. Pyrrhus first became king at just 13, but he didn't hold on to the throne for long. A rival overthrew him, and it took nearly a decade for him to fight his way back. Once restored, Pyrrhus didn't waste time. He scored a major win against Rome and even reclaimed Sicily from Carthage briefly. This would become a recurring pattern. Pyrrhus would capture new territory, win a costly battle, and then lose it just as fast thanks to his weakened army. Meanwhile, Pyrrhus was already on the next and better battle, holding off the forces of Rome. But his end wouldn't come at the hands of a Roman general. In 272 BCE, Pyrrhus lost his firstborn son in a battle against Sparta, and before he had time to mourn, he engaged in a civil revolt in Argos. He got on the ground and fought soldiers personally, and while he was engaged, the elderly mother of one of the soldiers threw a tile at him. Pyrrhus was knocked off his horse, injured his spine, and was left paralyzed on the ground, where he was killed by a passing soldier. It was an ironic end for a powerful king, and in fact, you might say his entire military career was, well, you know. Now let's return to China for a king whose obsession became self-fulfilling. Number 14. Qin Shi Huang. In 210 BCE, China was more unified than ever before. For the first time, the entire nation was ruled by one man, Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of China. He's even credited with inventing the very title of emperor. But Qin Shi Huang's rise to power wasn't exactly straightforward. His father wasn't born into the throne. He was adopted by a crown prince's consort and briefly became the king. And that set the stage for Qin Shi Huang, then known as King Zheng of Qin, to take the throne as a teenager, and he had very big plans. While his tenure was originally controlled by regents, he purged them after reaching adulthood and began a campaign of aggressive military expansion. He's considered one of the most pivotal figures in early Chinese history and was responsible for some of the key economic and political reforms that would transform the country. But there was one thing that he couldn't control: mortality. In those days, even kings were very vulnerable to an early death. That wouldn't do for Qin Shi Huang, so he surrounded himself with the best doctors, who may not have had the best advice. In 2011 BCE, a meteor crashed to Earth, and carved into its surface were the words, "The first emperor will die and his land will be divided." Furious, Qin Shi Huang demanded to know who had written it. When no one confessed, he had the nearby villagers executed. Already obsessed with avoiding death, Qin Shi Huang began to take an elixir created by his court alchemists that contained mercury, which predictably poisoned him, and he died at the age of 49. Ironically, he probably could have lived a lot longer without his magic elixir. Pride is a mortal sin, and so is wrath. Number 13. Valentinian I. Ruling the Roman Empire is a big job. So big, in fact, that in 364 AD it was taken on by two different people. The Eastern Roman Empire was ruled by Valens, and his brother Valentinian was in charge of the West. These were the latter days of the empire, and the once massive power was seeing its influence and territory decline. But Valentinian was determined to reverse that, and his reign saw many successful military campaigns that would gain him the nickname Valentinian the Great. But you don't get to greatness without being a little ruthless. Valentinian I had a solid 11-year run as Roman emperor, crushing a revolt in Africa and repelling a major invasion of Roman Britain by the Picts. Much of this success came from his alliance with the brilliant general Theodosius and his strong ties to the military. That loyalty not only won battles but also helped him shut down a brewing coup. With his two sons set to kick off a dynasty, it seemed like Valentinian would be the most successful Roman emperor in a long time. But he met his end in the most unlikely of ways. Valentinian was in the middle of a campaign, and he arranged a meeting with diplomats from the Quadi tribe. The negotiations started well, with the Quadi agreeing to supply troops to the Roman army. But things fell apart when the chief stated that they couldn't prevent individual Quadi forces from attacking Roman troops. Valentinian flew into a rage, screaming abuse at the Quadi envoys, until he suddenly keeled over from a stroke from sheer rage, making this one of the only casualties to ever come from a peace summit. Now let's jump forward about 500 years to a king of the north who had a bizarre death straight out of a horror movie. Number 12. Sigurd Eysteinsson. It was the 800s, and one of the most powerful positions in what would one day be the British Isles was the Jarl of Orkney. The area was currently under Viking conquest, as the Norse tribesmen were among the most powerful forces in Europe. Their fast-moving conquest was known for its brutality, but also for its efficiency and for the fear that it brought to those it conquered. And the current holder of the position was Sigurd Eysteinsson, better known as Sigurd the Mighty. The brother of the Earl of Moray in Norway, his life was largely chronicled in the Norse Heimskringla and the Orkneyinga sagas, and he had a dramatic reign by all accounts. He was the key to defeating a band of pirate Vikings who had been exiled from Norway and settled in islands off of what's now Scotland. Soon, Sigurd expanded his territory to the Scottish coast, but he wasn't satisfied. He drove further inland, and as an older ruler, he picked a fight with a local chieftain. The man was known as Mael Brigda, the Buck-Toothed, which in hindsight might have been a sign to pick a different fight. But Sigurd ignored that red flag and he set up an ambush. He was supposed to bring 40 men for a fair fight, so naturally he brought 80. The result was a one-sided massacre. Sigurd emerged victorious and beheaded his rival. It was the end of Maelbrigta the Bucktoothed, and it would be the end of Sigurd the Mighty as well. As an act of intimidation, Sigurd took the severed head and strapped it to his saddle, but the dead man's prominent tooth was exposed, and at some point it scratched the side of Sigurd's leg. This led to a serious infection, which led to sepsis, which in those days was essentially untreatable. The mighty king soon passed away from infection, creating both a valuable lesson about sanitation and about knowing when to stop rubbing in a victory. Of course, not all kings are warriors, but that doesn't mean they're safe. Number 11. Bela I of Hungary. In the 1000s, Europe was still very much in flux. Borders were revised regularly as marauding armies took chunks of territory. And in the middle of all that chaos was Bela I of Hungary. His early life was marked by tragedy. His father was executed when Bela was just a teen, forcing him and his brothers to flee to Poland. Bela would marry a daughter of the Polish king, giving him a path back to power. When his brother Andrew, already crowned King of Hungary, tried to edge Bela out of the line of succession, Bela responded in a medieval way. He rallied Polish support and he overthrew him, and a new golden age would be ushered in. Bela is largely considered one of the most significant kings in Hungary's history. He introduced major monetary reform and consolidated Christianity's hold over the country by putting down a revolt by pagan rebels. He was also seen as a magnanimous king, refusing to take any reprisals against Andrew's son and those loyal to him after they fled to Germany. He was a law and order monarch, and he even attempted to finalize a peace treaty with the Roman emperor. But his reign would be cut tragically short. A group of partisans loyal to Andrew's son Solomon were planning a revolt. However, to avoid war, Bela considered abdicating, but he never had the chance. One day at his manor, Bela sat down and his throne collapsed beneath him, causing serious injuries. While he survived the initial fall, he died while being taken for treatment near the western border. The powerful King Bela was undone by a broken chair, and the path was clear for Solomon's return. Sometimes it's more than one king that has bad luck, it's a whole family. Number 10. William the Conqueror. The rise of the Vikings would ultimately give way to the Norman conquest of England, and the figure at the center of it all would be the man known as William the Conqueror. From a humble start as the illegitimate son of Duke Robert I of Normandy, he grew up to be the center of a massive power struggle. By 1047, he had crushed a rebellion against him and consolidated his power. A marriage to a princess of the neighboring Flanders gave him the power he needed to make a big move, and that is exactly what he would do. William slowly built his power base, consolidating alliances and placing his agents within the church. By the 1050s and early 1060s, he was a contender for the throne. And when Edward the Confessor named a rival as his successor, William didn't take the snub lightly. He launched a massive invasion of England. His victory in the Battle of Hastings put him on the throne, and he was now one of the most powerful men in Europe. But he wasn't done yet. He wanted more of Europe, and as his reign went on, he decided to invade France. And that would turn into his graveyard. Feared across Europe, William's end came in a surprisingly awkward and painful way. While riding through the town of Mantes during his campaign in France, he fell from his horse and was impaled by the pommel of his saddle. Let's just say that injury was somewhere sensitive. No one's sure of the exact circumstances of his death, but he was taken to a local priory where he died in September 1087. And that would kick off a power struggle and a lot of unusual deaths. Number 9. William II of England. William the Conqueror had left a huge legacy, and that was enough to keep the power in his family's hands. His eldest son, Robert, had been exiled after a failed rebellion, and the second son had died in a hunting accident, and that left William II as the designated successor. He was an odd choice, an eccentric young man whose most notable trait was his red hair and who never married or had children. And that led to many questions about his lifestyle and what kind of king he would make, and it would turn out a very controversial one. William II was simply not the kind of person who was normally a king. Writers at the time described him as a devil-may-care soldier who didn't show the kind of social graces one would expect from a ruler. He was also known for his debaucherous lifestyle, coming off more like a latter-day Roman emperor. But when he needed to, he was a cunning warrior and managed to maintain his father's rule and expand the empire's territory. But despite this, traditionalists wanted someone else in the throne, and they might have gotten their wish through a bizarre accident. Or was it? Hunting was one of the king's many hobbies, and on August 2nd, 1100, he went on an expedition into the New Forest. While he was there, he and his men shot at many deer. One of those arrows found its way into the chest of the king. He was hit in the lung and he died quickly after. Walter Tyrrell was the suspected killer and would be sent into exile in France. But even today, many people wonder if the king's many critics may have had a friend in that forest. And it meant that it was time for the fourth son to ascend. Number 8. Henry I of England. Being the youngest brother is never easy. You spend your whole life being pushed around and living in the shadow of your siblings. And that was the case for Henry I, the youngest son of William the Conqueror. Unlike his older brothers, he didn't inherit a kingdom. And when he scraped together enough gold to buy the country of Cotentin, they banded together, conquered it, and then booted him out. But Henry wasn't out for long. He rebuilt his base of support, bided his time, and played the long game, backing his brother William against their other brother Robert in a brutal family tug-of-war over the throne. And that meant that after William's tragic hunting accident, it was his turn, and he would be a very different king. Henry I promised to bring back a sense of normalcy. He repealed some of William's unpopular laws, married a Scottish noble, and would go on to have several children. His eldest surviving child, Matilda, was married to the future Holy Roman Emperor. Henry's reign would be defined by frequent conflicts with his eldest brother, and he would eventually take Robert as prisoner and end their long-running conflict. He was a harsh but competent ruler, and that would lead to a very sketchy end. Henry I would continue to strengthen his kingdom's southern border, and in 1135 he took a break to go on a hunting trip. Unlike his brother, he escaped unscathed, and then he prepared to enjoy a hearty dinner. He had a particular fondness for lampreys, a strange jawless fish that resembles an eel. Despite his doctor's warnings, he overindulged one too many times. He took ill, and then soon the archbishop was summoned to deliver his last rites. And so the mighty king was felled, not by a sword, but by an exceptionally ugly fish that apparently didn't take dietary restrictions seriously. And that would kick off an age of anarchy, because there was one more death in the clan to come. Number 7. William Adelin. Born a year after his sister, William Adelin was nonetheless heir to the throne. It was good to be a boy in those days. He was groomed to be king from a young age, and as a teenager was described as one of the most pampered princes ever seen. Most members of the court viewed him as a weak young man, one who wouldn't have the fortitude of the rest of the family's warrior kings. It was thought that he might be susceptible to being manipulated by powerful allies of the crown. But in a shocking twist of fate, they wouldn't get the chance. William was named the Duke of Normandy, and this mostly consisted of him gallivanting around Europe on diplomatic missions. As he was only a teenager at the time, this was a dream life, and it lasted until 1120, when he and his companions were crossing the English Channel on the White Ship. He was enjoying a night of drinking and carousing until the helmsman, as drunk as the rest of the crew, accidentally steered the ship directly into a rock. Water flooded the ship, and William had a chance to escape, but he turned back to rescue his half-sister. In the confusion, the rescue boat capsized and William drowned. His death marked the end of plans for a stable succession after King Henry I. With no clear heir, England would soon descend into a period of civil war and unrest known as the Anarchy. And that would lead to a new order in the British Isles and a lot of new opportunities for bizarre deaths. Number 6. Alexander III of Scotland. The downfall of England's ruling family was an opening for Scotland to mix things up. In 1249, King Alexander II died, and his 7-year-old son Alexander III took the throne. To no one's surprise, this led to chaos, as various factions jockeyed for power amid the reign of the boy king. Alexander III would be married at only 10 years old to a slightly older English princess to boost the country's diplomatic prospects. When Alexander reached 21, he was ready to make his own mark as the king, and he wanted to complete his father's legacy. Alexander III would become known as one of Scotland's most ambitious kings, as he tried to take over the Western Isles from Norway and complete his father's most extensive expansion. King Håkon IV of Norway would invade in retaliation, but the more powerful forces of Scotland would have their day. This led to the Treaty of Perth that gained Scotland the Isle of Man and the Western Isles. With this move, Alexander had secured his legacy, but his rashness would wind up being his own undoing. It was March 19, 1286, and Alexander had one mission: to get back to a village called Kinghorn and to greet the Queen on her birthday. Being Scotland, the weather was rough, and his advisors urged him to hold back, but he refused, leading his team through the storm. He even refused to stop for the night, heading back out into the dark and cold. At some point, his crew lost sight of him, and they found him the next morning, lying dead on the shore. It's believed that his horse bucked him at some point, leading to a broken neck, and with no surviving children, it was the end of Scotland's golden age, and the power center of Europe shifted to the mainland, where one king would live up to his nickname. Number 5. Charles II of Navarre. How bad do you have to be literally known as the bad in the history books? We have to go back to the 100 Years' War between England and France, which dominated the 1300s. That was where Charles II rose to power in the Kingdom of Navarre in the Pyrenees. Between modern-day France and Spain, this was a significant piece of land, and when Charles took power as a teenager, he became an unlikely power player, and that would lead to his life being a source of mayhem. Raised in France, he was largely seen as an outsider in Navarre and had ambitions on the throne of the country where he grew up. Thus, he saw his kingdom as a little more than a place to raise manpower, and he was soon hated by his countrymen. He had poor relations with his fellow rulers, lost plenty of territories to the French, and his alliance with England was widely hated by the citizens. His failed attempt at a coup in France led to him losing Normandy and becoming a little more than a bit player in the war. But it wouldn't be the conflict that spelled his end. Charles II likely had many enemies, but none were responsible for his death. It was medical malpractice of the worst sort. He was in poor health, and his physician suggested a bizarre cure: to be wrapped head to toe in a cloth soaked in brandy. Now that's pretty unconventional and dangerous medical advice. During the treatment, one of his attendants accidentally brought a candle too close to the alcohol-soaked fabric, and the bad king went up like a giant cigar, bringing an ignominious end to his reign. Charles was seen as a cowardly king who exploited his people. Warrior kings are far more respected, but they don't always get better ends. Number 4. James II of Scotland. Another ruler who ascended at a young age, James II was the king by the age of 6, and that meant lots of power struggles. As he entered adulthood, he married a duke's daughter to solidify his political alliances, and he wouldn't be short of heirs. They had 7 children, 6 of whom lived to adulthood. He was seen as a genteel and intelligent king, if not a particularly strong one. His young age led to many ambitious noble families seeking to depose him or gain an advantage in his court, and that would plunge the whole country into a civil war. The main challenge was from the Douglas clan, who had wormed their way into the inner workings of the castle while James was a boy. He had their leader assassinated eventually to gain back his power, but that kicked off an ongoing series of conflicts that, unlike other kings, James II was directly involved in. In the end, he was able to conquer the Douglas clan and seize all of their lands. The future was looking bright for James II as he began a period of expansionism and modernization of Scotland's military. But that would be his last act. Warfare was changing, and James II wanted Scotland to change with it. A fan of artillery, James personally took part in an assault on one of the last English-held castles in Scotland, bringing a large number of cannons with him. While he was standing near one of them, it went off and it hit him with an artillery shell. The Scots continued the battle, they won, and the castle was demolished in retaliation for the death of the king. But the age of warrior kings was drawing to a close, and from here on out, the kings found some truly strange ways to die. Number 3. George II of Great Britain. By the 1700s, the British Isles were united and had grown into the most powerful empire on the face of the planet. George II's attention was heavily focused on the colonies in the Americas, where a rebellion was starting to get attention. But that would ultimately be his son's challenge to face. George II's legacy would be defined by the 7 Years' War, the latest skirmish between England and France. George II would be one of the longest-living kings of the era, being a key power broker in Europe from his ascension in 1727 to 1760. He was an old man by then, and that means that death isn't always dignified. By the end of his life, his vision and his hearing were both deteriorating, and he had other very serious health problems. One morning in October, he had a cup of hot chocolate and he went to the bathroom. And a few minutes later, there was a crash. His valet raced in to check on him, and he found the king had passed out. He was dead before the physician could reach him, which raises the question, is everyone who dies on the toilet really going out like Elvis? Or did the king of rock and roll go out like George II? But hey, at least he didn't quite ignore as many hints as this guy. Number 2. Adolf Frederick. Sweden might not have been as powerful as Great Britain, but being king there was a pretty sweet gig. The kingdom had a constitutional monarchy at that point, and Adolf Frederick was appointed to the throne by parliament. He was seen as a weak monarch chosen as a figurehead to stop the monarchists from bringing back absolute rule. The country was peaceful during his reign, but the economy struggled. But Adolf Frederick didn't seem very interested in any of that. He preferred a life of leisure and good food, and he liked to eat a lot. By 1771, Adolf Frederick was in his 60s, and despite the advice of his doctors, he sat down to a massive meal. And we mean massive. He ate lobster, caviar, fish, and champagne. and then topped it all off with a massive portion of pastries and hot milk. Not surprisingly, he soon took ill after this meal, and he died not long after from heart failure or another ailment. While some have questioned the exact details of the meal, what is not debated is what came next. His son Gustav III immediately took control in a military coup and restored the monarchy to full power. You had one job, Adolf. But no monarch had a more embarrassing death than this one, and he waited until the 20th century. Number 1. Alexander of Greece. The year was 1917, and Alexander of Greece had just ascended the throne. This was the turbulent aftermath of World War I, and Alexander wasn't so much a ruler as a placeholder. His father and brother had been forced into exile by a power-hungry prime minister, leaving Alexander to serve as a symbolic monarch, just enough to keep the loyalists from rebelling. He had little political experience, and the puppet king didn't really seem to care. But when he married a commoner, it ignited outrage and nearly got him exiled himself. He returned a few months later, only to find his enemies waiting for him. But none of them would get him. One day, King Alexander was strolling through the royal estate, taking in the lush grounds and enjoying the company of his German shepherd. But the dog got into a fight with a domesticated monkey, because if a king can't have a monkey, then who can? Alexander stepped in to break it up, and that turned out to be a terrible decision. The monkey bit him. His wounds were treated and bandaged, and the king reportedly asked for the incident to be kept quiet. The bite became infected, sepsis followed, and his condition deteriorated. Amputating the leg might have saved him, but none of the doctors wanted to take that decision. Alexander died a few weeks after the attack. Want to know how they die in that land of princes and kings? Check out Dumbest Ways to Die Florida edition, or watch this episode instead.